50 cents.
Not a lot.
Com 90 hoje em dia, nada.
1,5 liraya bisküvi.
Ich denke, einen Kaffee aus dem Automat bestimmt.
Did you know it costs 50 cents to feed one hungry child for one full day?
50 cents to feed one child a day.
Mümkün mü?
Increíble.
아유, 그러면은 당장 그걸 사야죠.
With the Share the Meal app, you can share your meal with children in need with just 50 cents and a tap on your smartphone. Smartphone users outnumber hungry children by 20 to 1. Imagine the impact you and your friends can have. Together, we can end global hunger. Please download the app.
This is DW News coming to you live from Berlin. Cities across Ukraine come under renewed Russian attack. Multiple missiles strike Lviv in the west, killing several people. Russia claims it's taking out military infrastructure, but officials in Kharkiv in the east of the Ukraine say civilians were hit too. Also coming up, Ukraine says its troops will fight to the end to defend Mariupol's last pocket of resistance. Several thousand are believed to be defending a key steel mill against Russia's destructive attack.
If I'm called up, I think I'm ready, even though I've never held a weapon in my life. But everything can be learned, step by step.
Hairdressers, journalists, pacifists, Ukrainian men have been ordered to stay in the country and fight. They tell us how it feels to prepare for war. Hello, I'm Terry Martin. Good to have you with us. Major Ukrainian cities are coming under renewed attack from Russian airstrikes. Powerful explosions hit the western city of Lviv early on Monday, killing several people. Meanwhile, Kharkiv in the east has come under heavy shelling. Russia claims it has struck hundreds of military and weapons facilities in recent days, but civilians are coming under fire too. A warning, the following report contains some graphic images.
This is what Russian shelling does. Medics rush to help a wounded woman. Next to her, another person is clinging to life. Then, sirens and more explosions. The emergency workers rush for cover. They have no choice but to leave the victims exposed and bleeding out on the street. Sunday's shelling of Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, killed at least 5 people and wounded another 13. Graphic scenes like this one have become commonplace around the country. As Russian forces bear down on eastern Ukraine, they're keeping up with attacks elsewhere in an apparent effort to weaken Ukraine's ability to defend itself. I call on all those who live under unending bombardment to leave. Our volunteers will help you do that. The Russian Defense Ministry said it struck more than 300 targets overnight across the country and downed Ukrainian fighter jets. On Monday, the governor of the Lviv region said strikes there killed and wounded several people, including civilians at non-military sites. This is an absolutely barbaric attack on an absolutely civilian target. People came to work in the morning. The western part of Ukraine has largely avoided Russia's wrath, but it's not been totally immune. Russian military planners have said nowhere in Ukraine is safe, something the country's civilian population knows painfully well.
Ukraine comes after Russia suffered a major loss on Thursday. The Black Sea flagship, the Moskva, sank after allegedly being hit by Ukrainian missiles, something the Kremlin denies. Now, images have surfaced appearing to show the warship on fire and engulfed in smoke just moments before it sank. The missile cruiser was the biggest Russian warship to sink while in action since World War II. I asked DW's Russia analyst Konstantin Eggert about how damaging those images might be for President Vladimir Putin's war effort.
I think that not only Navy professionals, but basically the general public can grasp what goes on in these pictures. It is a PR blow. It is definitely something that says quite a bit about the combat readiness of at least elements of the Russian Navy. And that means probably also quite some of the Russian army. It is quite an embarrassment, frankly speaking, especially bearing in mind the fact that Putin spent quite a lot of time in the last, let's say, 10 years trumpeting the modernization and the new prowess of the Russian fleet.
You say that the sinking of the Moskva does tell us something about Russia's military capabilities. Does it raise any doubts about Russia's ability, Konstantin, to capture and control eastern regions of Ukraine?
Well, if you extrapolate what happened with the Moskva on, well, at least some of the ground forces, probably yes. But with regard to the Moskva itself, it is quite a significant loss, practical loss for Russian Navy combat operations. I've spoken to several Navy experts in the run-up to our conversation, and there are at least two things that are clear. Moskva was supposed to be the main air defense platform of the whole Black Sea fleet, and because of that, those troop transports that potentially can carry Russian troops from, say, the Crimean Peninsula to the Ukrainian coast. They felt protected. Not anymore. None of the ships that remain within in the Black Sea fleet are capable of providing effective air coverage for the troop transport. So maybe there's going to be a few of them, and maybe if there are, Ukrainians can attack them essentially with impunity. And second thing, any kind of attempt to, say, take the port of Odessa from the sea will be now probably doomed. I mean, one military expert told me they'd rather not even try it, because without the missile coverage from the Moskva, it will be just completely mission impossible.
Meanwhile, Russian forces appear to be intensifying their attacks, Konstantin, saying they hit more than 300 Ukrainian targets overnight. The Ukrainian President Zelensky has signaled peace talks may now be off the table. What's the view from the Kremlin? Is President Putin at all interested in peace talks?
Well, I think that until now, for Putin, it was just a way of presenting himself as a reluctant warrior to the public at home and to, well, whoever remains believing Putin in the world. Well, you see, I'm a man of peace. I really want a solution. Is just the stubborn Zelensky that doesn't want it. That was the message from Moscow. I think that after, it was a couple of days ago, I think, right, Terry? Zelensky said that his goal is actually recapturing the whole of the Ukrainian east, including the areas that were taken over by Russia in 2014. Well, probably there is no reason to have any peace talks, because it seems that the final goals are completely incompatible. I think that Zelensky thinks in terms of essentially driving the Russian forces from at least significant parts of the east, while Putin really desperately, Putin's generals who are now, whose fate hangs in the balance, they think about capturing Mariupol and kind of securing a land bridge between the Russian Federation proper and the Crimean Peninsula. And this drama will be unfolding in front of us, Terry, in the coming 3 weeks, because just to remind you one thing, 9th of May, V-Day, is the main state holiday, the main date in 1,000 years Russian state history that Putin now proclaims, and he has to show something for V-Day. So I'm afraid there's going to be very, very intense fighting for Mariupol, although looking at how the Russian troops performed before, maybe it's not yet even going to be decisive.
Konstantin, thank you very much, as always. Our correspondent, Konstantin Egot, there. As the Ukrainian army suffers losses in battle, more men are being called up to serve. For now, only reservists have to answer the call, but all men deemed eligible to serve are banned from leaving the country and could be drafted to the front lines. For some, it's a battle they relish. For others, it's one they dread. DW's Amin Esif has been to meet some of them. Let's catch up on some other stories making headlines around the world today. The death toll from Tropical Storm Maggie in the Philippines has risen to 172, with another 110 people reported missing. The storm has triggered landslides and floods, which have devastated communities in central regions. Authorities say rain and unstable ground are hampering rescue efforts. More than 440 people have been killed in flooding and landslides in South Africa's KwaZulu-Natal province. It's one of the deadliest storms to hit the region. Dozens are missing, many feared dead. Rescue teams are still searching for survivors. Spanish Coast Guards have rescued 60 migrants off the Canary Islands. The travelers, including 9 children, were passed to emergency services. The rights organization Walking Borders says more than 4,400 migrants died last year trying to reach Spain. Iran's president has warned his armed forces will respond with force to any hostile action from Israel. Ebrahim Raisi was speaking at the National Army Day parade in Tehran. International talks to restore the 2015 Iran nuclear deal have stalled. In football, Bayern Munich coach Julian Nagelsmann says he received death threats from fans after the club was knocked out of the Champions League. But the Bavarians had better luck in the Bundesliga, moving closer to claiming the German title after beating Arminia Bielefeld.
Julian Nagelsmann's Bayern have only the Bundesliga to focus on now. 3 points in Bielefeld would edge them agonizingly close to a 10th straight title.
Well, Union Berlin keep rising in the Bundesliga table thanks in part to this man. Well, the Bundesliga other big showdown saw RB Leipzig leapfrog opponents Bayern Leverkusen in the table. And here are the rest of the results from this weekend's Bundesliga action. As we just saw, Leipzig edged out Leverkusen, Frankfurt succumbed to Union, and Bayern thumped Bielefeld. Hoffenheim and Fürth drew. Cologne beat Gladbach. Dortmund with a huge triumph over Wolfsburg. Hertha Berlin beat Augsburg, and Mainz and Stuttgart drew 0-0. And Freiburg downed Bochum. Let's see how the table has shaped up after the end of match day 30. The title race isn't a done deal yet. Dortmund still with the slimmest of chances despite trailing Bayern by 9 points. In the lower half of the table, 1 point separates Stuttgart in the relegation playoff place from Hertha Berlin. Now, the world's biggest carnival is back, with hundreds of thousands of revelers taking to the streets of Rio de Janeiro in the coming days. Brazil's famous samba schools have been hard at work rehearsing, and hardcore carnival goers are celebrating their freedom to party once more. Now the city has lifted restrictions.
Ecstatic crowds throng the streets of Rio de Janeiro as Carnival kicks off over the Easter weekend. It's unusually late this year, but the festival was delayed because of the COVID-19 pandemic. A major outbreak of the Omicron variant hit Brazil in February. Now's the right moment. We're all vaccinated and we can finally let our hair down. Elsewhere, people are still preparing their costumes. This is the high point of the year for Rio's samba schools. Many of their members died during the pandemic. Others spent weeks in intensive care. Other patients died next to me in the hospital. I was completely exhausted and I felt alone. In the Sambadrome, last rehearsals are underway, a few days before the big competition of the Samba schools. Last year it had to be cancelled due to the pandemic. With the return of the street carnival, the residents of Rio are enjoying a kind of rebirth after 2 difficult years. It really wasn't easy, but now we feel again that the power is in us, the power to keep going. And the people of Rio are once again ready to fully embrace the carnival season that they're famous for.
Great stuff. You're watching DW News. Here's a reminder of our top story. Ukrainian population centers are under renewed attack from Russian airstrikes. Several people have been killed in explosions in the western city of Lviv. Meanwhile, defenders are still holding out in a massive steel plant in the besieged port of Mariupol. Russia says it controls nearly all of the city. Most is in ruins. You've been watching DW News live from Berlin. Stick with us. Up next is DW News Asia, and we'll be back at the top of the hour.
Turns 70 and tells DW what's truly important in life. We take a look at his past and future. Meet the artist. A very personal Kent Nagano.
Arts 21. In 60 minutes on DW. To own or not to own? What about a sharing economy instead? A change in thinking is changing the economy to create something new. The Economics Magazine, made in Germany. On DW.
The amount of plastic is increasing every year.
For many in Ghana, working on landfills is the only work there is.
Holiday destinations are drowning in plastic waste.
We rewind and take a look at the causes.
Every year, Europe exports over 1 million tons of plastic waste. Is there another way? After all, the environment isn't recyclable. Make up your own mind. DW, made for minds.
This is DW News Asia coming up today. Shanghai reports its first deaths from COVID in an outbreak there. Authorities say 3 people out of 25 million are the only fatalities so far in China's financial hub. We ask, how true are these figures and what do they say about China's zero COVID strategy? Plus, a guided weapons test that brought a smile to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's face. But how dangerous are these weapons? A North Korea specialist explains. I'm Biresh Banerjee. Welcome to DW News Asia. Glad you could join us. Shanghai has reported its first 3 deaths from COVID-19 in its ongoing outbreak. More than 23,000 cases have been reported in 24 hours alone. Now, spikes like these have led to authorities locking down the city of 25 million for 3 straight weeks. It's part of the zero-COVID policy dictated by Beijing. But this strategy of immediately isolating people to break off infection chains has led to non-availability of essential items, resulting in anger on the streets.
Rare scenes of dissent hinting at growing anger under Shanghai's lockdown. Police in protective gear put an end to what was reportedly a protest against plans to set up an isolation complex in this neighborhood.
All of us here are law-abiding citizens. We want to do what we can to help the country. You prohibited us from meeting others or even going outside anywhere, and we complied. But now you want to put highly infectious people less than 20 meters away from where we live? What more do we have to put up with?
Loudspeakers summon residents to come out of their homes for mandatory testing. Anyone who tests positive is sent to an isolation center for at least a week of observation, regardless whether they show symptoms. With as many as 1,000 people packed into makeshift facilities, living conditions there are also a source of frustration.
The bathrooms are not very clean. That's understandable because so many people are using them, and cleaners and volunteers can't keep up, so they're a little dirty. And we haven't been able to take a warm shower. The lights are on all night long, so it's hard to fall asleep. These are the things that people are complaining about most.
Doctors come by twice a day to take patients' temperature. With many exhibiting no symptoms at all, increasingly people are more concerned about the hardships the outbreak is causing than the virus itself.
At first, people were scared of the virus and were panicking. But with the figures that are being published every day, people have started to accept the fact that this particular virus is not that horrible. So I think there's been a change in everyone's thinking.
But so far, there's no sign of a change in thinking by China's communist leaders. They continue to insist that the country must stick to its tough measures aimed at eliminating the virus.
Joining me now is correspondent Fabian Kretschmer, who is based in Beijing. Fabian, 3 COVID deaths in a population of 25 million in Shanghai. It sounds incredible there aren't more fatalities.
Well, we know at least of another dozen elderly who died after contracting the virus. They died in a nursing home, and they all didn't show up in the official statistics. So at least it's safe to assume that it's not transparent to what criteria the authorities use of underlying conditions or whether the virus is responsible for the death. I wouldn't take the official data at face value. Probably the death rate especially is much higher. And we should also not forget that there's an increasing number of dead people not caused by the virus itself, but by the lockdown measures. For example, asthma patients, cancer patients, patients who have not received treatment on time because of the lockdown restrictions.
And these lockdown restrictions are also appearing to force many Shanghai residents to deal with a number of shortages. Can you talk a bit about that, please?
Yeah, I mean, for most residents that I talk to, basically food supply and water supply is still the biggest topic. They are worried. However, to some degree, the supply situation has improved, however, only at a very slow rate. And most of the voices that we hear and also the residents that I talk to are rather privileged. There are many so muted voices, basically, let's say migrant workers, lesser privileged people. Their situation, of course, is even more dire. So I would say it's still quite a precarious situation for most of the 26 million residents.
You spoke a bit about earlier about a number of elderly people dying possibly because of underlying conditions, maybe exacerbated by COVID. I'd just like to sort of focus on that. There are also reports that a majority of the people aged above 60 in China aren't vaccinated. I wonder why that is.
Yeah, I mean, the rate is quite low. Shanghai residents over 60, only 38% have received 3 shots of the local-made vaccine. That is really low. I think there are several reasons for it. One is that until very recently, the zero-COVID strategy here was rather successful. The daily infection numbers were so low that we felt very safe, and the incentive to get vaccinated was maybe not as high as in other countries. And also, especially among the elderly, there's quite a lot of skepticism against the vaccines, also against Western science in general. So I would say there are a lot of rumors, disinformation, so people are quite cautious of getting vaccinated. We actually had quite a similar problem in Hong Kong. A lot of deaths were also caused in Hong Kong because many of the most vulnerable, the elderly, were not vaccinated.
You talked about the zero-COVID strategy and that people felt comfortable with this strategy in place. Just generally, Fabian, from the conversations that you have with people in Beijing and in other parts of China, do you get the sense that there is overall support for the government's zero-COVID policy when nearly every other country is learning to live with the virus?
I mean, the public opinion is quite split. Those affected by the lockdowns in Shanghai, they're openly protesting it. Many of them are criticizing it. There are even like fist fights against health workers. I mean, really, it's really an intense situation. And I don't think many people in Shanghai support it anymore. However, in the rest of the country, or especially in parts that are not affected right now by lockdowns, there's basically more support for it. And we also should not forget that the censorship is really deleting a lot of social media postings that are critical, and the domestic media, the only available media, so to speak, here in China, is always spinning it in a positive way. So what they report about Shanghai is quite ignorant to the real suffering of the people.
Fabian Kretschmer in Beijing. We'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you so much for joining us today. To North Korea next, which test-fired a new type of tactical guided weapon over the weekend. The state news agency said it was aimed at boosting the country's nuclear capabilities. Pyongyang released pictures of leader Kim Jong-un observing the launch. It comes as the US and South Korea warn that the North could be about to resume nuclear testing. Now, fears of this grew after Kim broke a self-imposed moratorium on intercontinental ballistic missile testing last month. Joining me now for more on this from Seoul is Jongmin Kim. She is lead correspondent for nknews.org, a news portal that reports exclusively on North Korea. Jongmin, it's been called a tactical guided weapon. What more can you tell us about the threat that this poses?
So the main issue is that they frame this as tactical, not strategic. And when they say tactical guided weapon, they say that this is actually for deployment for usage. And I think this is important, parsing this with how the Rodong Sinmun, the state newspaper, reported on what Kim Jong-un reportedly said when guiding the missile test. It seems that Kim Jong-un talked about how this will be helping the country's nuclear combat forces. And considering how, according to the South Korean JCS, this has a very low altitude and shorter range, this could serve as an immediate threat to neighbors, not just the United States, as we usually think about when we hear tactical guided weapon or tactical nuclear weapon. So this, looking at this, South Korea and Japan will see this as an immediate threat. And it's also interesting how it's considered as an addition to nuclear combat forces capabilities, because just a few days ago, North Korean leader Sister Kim Yo-jong was railing against South Korean defense minister's preemptive strike related remark, saying that if and when South Korea actually attacks North Korea, thinking about preemptive strike, it will be, Kim Yo-jong was saying it will be unwise for South Korea to attack a nuclear state, allegedly, and said that it maybe when it's necessary, they will have to put their nuclear combat forces on mission. So all in all, it seems that the messaging is not just towards the United States, but also towards South Korea as well, especially just a few weeks ahead of the incoming administration.
And that is what I did want to talk to you about. Yoon Suk-yeol, who takes office in May, has been elected as the new president. What can we expect from his administration when it comes to North Korea and its weapons program?
The preemptive strike remark and North Korea's criticism against this is actually interesting in relations to this. The president-elect Yoon Suk-yeol has been talking about boosting preemptive strike capabilities of South Korea called kill chain in the past among the three-pillar system, and he talked about reinstating them against emerging North Korean nuclear and missile threat. And we can imagine that after he comes into office, he will talk more openly about building these capabilities. And to Yoon, North Korea directly mentioning nuclear combat forces, hinting at deterring South Koreans, developing deterrent capabilities and weapon capabilities. It seems that there is mounting challenge for Yoon to handle in the coming years, it seems.
Jungmin, we have about a minute left. On the 25th of April, we are expecting, is the anniversary of the founding of the Korean People's Army. Do you expect more weapons tests in the lead up to that?
I can't say definitively about a missile test, but I can say that there have been signs for weeks that a military parade is coming. Many of us thought that it may happen on the April 15th, Day of the Sun, the late leader Kim Il-sung's birthday, but apparently they went for just a civilian gathering. So we are expecting potential military parade there, where we may see more weaponries rolled out on Kim Il-sung Square, which South Korea and U.S. intelligence will be probably monitoring very closely as well.
Jungmin Kim from nknews.org. We leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And that's it for today. There's, of course, more from the region on our website, dw.com/Asia. And as ever, you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook as well. We're back tomorrow at the same time. We'll see you then. Goodbye.
I'm scared that if I work that hard and in the end they tell me, you are not allowed to stay here anymore, we will send you back.
Are you familiar with this?
The smugglers were liars.
What's your story?
Women especially are victims of violence.
Take part and send us your story.
We are trying always to understand this new culture. So you are not a visitor, not a guest. You want to become a citizen.
Info Migrants, your platform for reliable information.
China's economic growth beats expectations, but the harsh lockdowns in Shanghai and other cities means trouble ahead for the world's second biggest economy. Also coming up, we take you to Finland, where paper producers are facing an existential crisis thanks to digitalization and now rising inflation. And the EU wants to hold European firms accountable for the practices of their suppliers. What does that mean for the global chocolate industry, where human rights and sustainability issues are commonplace? I'm Chelsea Delaney in Berlin. Welcome to the show. China's economy expanded by a better-than-expected 4.8% in the first 3 months of the year. But the outlook for the world's second biggest economy is darkening as China resorts to harsh lockdowns in Shanghai and other cities to contain COVID-19 outbreaks. The Chinese economy had its strongest growth in 10 years in 2021, thanks largely to surging exports. GDP growth was as high as 18.3% in the first 3 months of last year as they recovered from the first pandemic hit, but growth has been slowing, as you can see, in recent quarters. Today's 4.8% GDP increase indicates it's going to be tough for China to hit its 5.5% GDP target for the full year. Now, my colleague Clifford Coonan, our resident China expert, joins me now in the studio. Clifford, thanks so much for being with me to break this down. So this data is a bit of a mixed bag. They're saying it's better than expected, but at the same time, as we clearly just saw, growth is slowing. What's behind that slowdown?
Well, I think the two main factors behind these, as you say, better than expected figures, but still pretty weak when you consider the 5.5% growth target the government has. The main things we've seen has been a combination of the zero COVID policy, where there's been a clampdown, people locked in their homes, no one can go out. And also then this is combined with the effect of the war in Ukraine, which is also hitting growth.
So what sectors are suffering the most right now?
Well, what we're seeing, it's hitting real estate, exports, retail sales. It's pretty much across the board. New home sales tumbled by 29% last month, which is a pretty serious decline, given that the real estate sector is so important to the overall economy. And as we know, it already has problems to deal with from the Evergrande debt collapse. And so they're dealing with putting out fires in the real estate sector. At the same time, passenger car sales were down 10% in April, which is after the current round of data, which I think gives us an idea of how things are going to be looking forward. And then the zero COVID effect is causing all kinds of supply chain issues. We're seeing the ports are completely clogged. And if you imagine, like in a lot of Chinese factories, a lot of workers live on the factories. And during these lockdowns, they've actually been working while living there. They've just created these kind of bubbles and working in that, which is great. But once you produce the goods, how do you get them out? And if the truck driver, for example, is locked in his apartment on the outskirts of Shanghai, he can't come and pick it up. So there's real logistics and supply chain issues which are causing a lot of trouble.
So we did hear today from some companies, Tesla, Volkswagen, for example, that they are going to be able to restart production in Shanghai and other cities in China soon. What is the outlook here? Is there an end in sight for these lockdowns that are causing problems for so many businesses, so many people?
Yeah, well, we've had 3 weeks of this, and again, it's a bit mixed, because you have the government has funneled $52 billion in COVID relief, but it's mostly focused on companies. As you say, Tesla and Volkswagen's Chinese partner are talking about restarting, but even then, it's still a bit stop-start, and nobody knows how long, how it's going to work, how they're going to, because a lot of things have to happen at once for them to start getting the cars out of the factories, for example. And the government has also introduced some forms of corporate income tax relief, value-added tax relief. There's various things which could help, but at the moment the message from the central government in Beijing seems to be that the lockdown is here to stay, that until Omicron is defeated, it's being presented as a political struggle almost.
Just very briefly, if you can, what does this mean politically for Xi Jinping, who is facing a re-election later this year?
Well, it's a big year this year, and this year in October he's expected to confirm his unprecedented third term as leader. He needs everything to be in place and everything to be smooth for that to happen. So this is certainly a kind of upset that he won't want to be happening at this stage of the year.
Clifford Coonan, our China expert, thanks so much for breaking this down for me. Now, we're all seeing prices rising in our grocery, electricity, and petrol bills, but the paper those bills are printed on is also surging in cost. Our next report takes us to Finland, where once mighty printing houses are struggling as inflation collides with a long-running decline in demand for paper.
Printing houses all over Europe are working at full capacity again. Newspapers and magazines are selling at almost pre-pandemic levels. At the Sanomala printing house in the Finnish capital Helsinki, print volumes have stayed steady compared to the 20% rise other print companies are reporting from last year. At the same time, production costs have risen, says economist Marit Lindström.
The rising costs of these products have to do with higher energy prices, as well as the current high costs in logistics services. Another reason why paper has become more expensive and scarcer, 4 paper mills in Finland have closed in recent years. The owners had noticed the demand for digital products rising and correspondingly the demand for paper declining around 5% annually. In addition, the beginning of this year saw the Paper Workers' Union call for a strike at 4 other mills. The union insisted that wages stay at previously agreed levels with no cuts in pay. The global paper market still needs tens of millions of tons of fine paper, even if demand is declining. We are asking, where do you want to have it manufactured? Here or elsewhere? In a country where 75% of the surface is covered in forest, raw materials are plenty. As a result of the insecurities plaguing the industry, some mills have switched from manufacturing paper to pulp and cardboard. Pulp is sold mainly to the Asian market, where demand for sanitary paper is growing rapidly. Packaging materials are expected to take up 2/3 of the paper industry's global output by the end of 2022.
Now to some of the other global business stories making news. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has held a call with IMF chief Kristalina Georgieva about Ukraine's post-war reconstruction. Later this week, Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal is due to attend both meetings of the IMF and the World Bank in Washington, where he will seek further financial assistance for Ukraine. Around 200,000 people in Moscow are likely to lose their jobs due to foreign companies leaving or suspending operations in Russia. That's according to the city's mayor, Sergei Sobyanin. Global firms from across the world of business have been leaving Russia since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. Long queues of Russian and Belarus trucks remain at the Polish-Belarus border after a deadline for them to leave the EU territory passed on Saturday. The EU has banned lorries from the 2 countries as part of its sanctions package, although those carrying petroleum, medicine, or mail can remain. Now, the chocolate Easter bunny you ate yesterday may have been made from cocoa grown on a farm in Ghana, the world's 2nd biggest producer. The chocolate industry has long been criticized for using child labor and for contributing to deforestation. A proposed EU supply chain law seeks to ensure companies here source only fair and sustainably made cocoa.
It's time to harvest the cocoa beans on Bismarck Agekum's 5-hectare plot in Ghana. It should be enough to guarantee a good harvest, but he struggles to make a living. I can't cultivate cocoa on a larger scale. I need help with things like fertilizer and pesticides. I hope the government raises the price for cocoa beans. The Ghanaian government has decided to intervene in the cocoa industry and is regulating prices to help farmers earn more. But it's not enough. Even with the measures, things like fertilizers are unaffordable. He also grows bananas to ensure that his 6 children have enough to eat. The 52-year-old is just one of 2 million independent farmers who grow the overwhelming majority of cocoa produced in Western Africa. In his village, the white cocoa beans are processed. His children help. But Bismarck Agekum says he makes sure that they're only given simple tasks and that they still go to school. I show my wife and the children how the work is done. Then we harvest together and we all benefit from it. It helps take care of my family. But on many family farms, children are forced to do heavy work, even if it's illegal. They have to carry heavy sacks or work with pesticides or a machete. According to a study carried out by the University of Chicago, more than 1.5 million children in Ghana and neighbouring Ivory Coast are affected. Human rights abuses like child labour, malnutrition or exploitation have been known to be commonplace in the cocoa industry for years. The European Union is the world's largest importer of cocoa beans. More than 50% of all global production was sent to the EU last year. And the same problems plague other resources like coffee, palm oil, soybeans or rubber. The EU Commission now wants to hold companies that purchase these raw materials to account with a new supply chain law. Firms will be obliged to ensure their employees have decent pay and conditions and environmental standards are adhered to.
Given the consumer's interest, companies have been trying since some time to better control the possible impacts of their activities on human rights, the environment and climate. It is a matter of reputation for them. However, we need a larger scale of companies to bring more effective improvement to the living conditions of people and the environment. This larger scale cannot be achieved with voluntary measures only.
Among other things, the proposed bill would compel companies to sign up to a human rights agreement. They'd then be obliged to monitor their supply chains, making sure workers are treated fairly and paid accordingly, and to limit environmental damage. The law could also open the door for workers to seek financial compensation from companies that neglect their obligations.
And before we go, the Ever Forward, a massive container ship, was finally refloated on Sunday after being stuck in the U.S. East Coast Chesapeake Bay for 4 weeks. The ship was eventually dislodged after nearly 500 of 5,000 containers had to be removed to make it lighter and easier to shift. The ship is owned by the Evergreen Marine Corporation. That's the same company that owns the container ship Ever Given, which famously blocked the Suez Canal last year and disrupted global trade for several days. And that's our show. For more from us, you can check out dw.com/business. Until next time, take care.
Turns 70 and tells DW what's truly important in life. We take a look at his past and future. Meet the artist. A very personal Kent Nagano.
Art 21. In 30 minutes on DW.
Suing on behalf of the climate? More and more citizens are taking legal action against governments and corporations, demanding more drastic measures against global warming. The successful fight of individuals against all-powerful industries. Legal action, verdicts, climate protection.
Close up. In 75 minutes on DW.
What's making the headlines and what's behind them?